Welcome to part 2 of our 4-part series on transforming education through concept-based learning. I'm Rachel French, the Director of Professional Learning International, and your host for the series. Today, we're focused on transforming practice, and I've invited 3 incredibly passionate educators to join us and share how concept-based learning has transformed their classrooms. So, allow me to introduce Ruba Abisab, who is a Year 6 teacher and an instructional coach at Aris International School in Ghana. And we're joined by Kevin Richards, who is a high school social studies teacher at Linden High School in Washington State, the United States. And welcome to Andrea Yule, who's an elementary teacher at Frankfurt International School in Germany and an illustrator. Ruba, Kevin, and Andrea are all certified Erickson Lanning CBCI trainers. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining me today.
All right, so the way that we've started each of these sessions is to invite you all to share your own concept-based journey. So a little bit about how you came across concept-based learning, the learning that you have done along the way, and the changes that you're starting to see in your classroom. So Andrea, why don't you dive in and start by sharing your concept-based journey with us all?
All right, I started out my journey at a PYP school. That's where I really got introduced to the idea of concept-based learning, but I didn't really get it. Then there was some exposure to some, Lynn and Lois, they both came to our school and we did trainings. We had trainings with Rachel, and these little pieces started to sort of build my understanding of concept-based, but it didn't really take off until I did the institute, the year-long institute. And that's when things really started to click and really started to see some transformation happening in my classroom and in my practice, because I really felt like I started to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. That commitment to a year-long journey is incredible in terms of our own professional learning.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrea. And Ruba, tell us about your journey.
My journey is a bit similar to Andrea's. I want to thank Yvonne, my sister, for introducing the concept-based approach. She won a free workshop with you, Rachel, in Germany.
She did, yeah.
Yeah, and she realized the great impact of this approach on both teachers and students. So she came back from Germany with loads of aha moments, and then we started reflecting on our practices. And then that's how the journey started. And then we invited you over for a 2-day workshop, and that's how it started.
Yeah, I remember coming up to your classroom in one of the breaks in the 2-day workshop, and you were showing me the things that you'd already started trying before I'd even got there and done the workshop with you. That was really exciting. And I remember you saying to me, do you think I would be a good fit for the Institute? Is it something that I should go for?
Yes, I was so worried back then because I did not have a clear picture of what the concept-based approach was all about. So I was just trying strategies out. And then after I was enrolled in the Institute, the picture got clearer as I engaged with many facilitators, with many educators around the world, where we shared our understandings and we reflected on our learning, especially the question and answer sessions. It's an experience to remember.
Yeah, I think you said that really well. It like solidified and made all those pieces just sort of click.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Kevin, share your story with us.
So for me, our curriculum director at Linden School District let me know about a training we were having locally where Lynn was, I don't know if it was her last one in this area, but she was putting on the 2-day seminar here and with Tiffany Brown together. And I had been hoping to do stuff like this for a long time, but I didn't have any names for any of the things that I wanted to do. I just knew that there was a better way to teach social studies than the way that I had been taught to do it. Something to bring everything together. And when I first encountered the 2-day workshop and having a chance to engage with Lynn and Tiffany and others, it really helped me to start having, really it was the concepts I needed to be able to put into words how things should be fitting together and what really felt like the most effective way to teach. So I attended every 2-day workshop that Tiffany offered on. And if there was any follow-up, I would attend that every chance I had. to attend a little bit more, to gain a little bit more knowledge of concept-based curriculum and instruction. I wanted it. And every time I went, I learned more things and it got deeper and more fun. And I just really enjoyed having a chance to talk with people. And so when we had a chance to do the year-long training, it opened that up more. So I'd have, over the course of a year, people to talk with, reflect with, and work with, and really try to put things into practice. I had more time to absorb the things I was learning. And it's still something I continue to learn and love. So yeah, that's my story.
Fantastic. I love that you went to the same workshop with Tiffany multiple times, because I also did the same thing with Lynn. Even once I was a certified trainer, every time she came to Europe, I would make sure that I was there. And she did the same workshop each time, but every time I learned something different, or I heard something different. I was like, that's what I need in order to articulate that. So I don't think it happens enough. But the power in doing the same workshop more than once, or it's the same, reading the same book more than once is incredible. So thanks for sharing that. So I want to ask each of you now to kind of think back to the time that you knew this was making a difference. So obviously you do some professional learning and you go back and you try some things in your classroom. And what was that one time or that kind of conversation that you had with a student or with another teacher when you went, this is significant, this really is making a difference to student learning? Maybe this time, Ruba, we'll start with you.
The moment I knew that shifting to a concept-based approach is really making a difference in the classroom is when my students started enjoying the literacy sessions. Writing and literature was a big problem before, these dry grammar lessons that you have to deliver turned into engaging lessons full of multiple examples, spotting patterns, coming up with conclusions, group work. So they started waiting for these sessions, and even parents also gave amazing feedback regarding their students' love for their kids' love for literature. Actually, one of three of my students chose literature as a topic to delve deeper into in this exhibition. So
wow.
Yeah, so this shows that it's really making a difference in the classroom.
Yes, absolutely. And for sure, when you get parent feedback that is saying,
Yes.
wow, I'm noticing this from my students, you definitely know that you're on the right track.
And even their quality writings, the way they write now, the different genres, the way they investigate, the way they spot patterns, the way they use graphic organizers is advancing. It's getting better over time because they're being well trained on how to look at multiple examples, and they know exactly what they're looking for. So the way they organize the information and they develop their own conceptual understanding is also getting better with time.
I think that you are the queen of graphic organizers. I know in your Facebook group, you share lots of the graphic organizers that you're doing, and all over the walls in your classroom, it's just filled with the graphic organizers that are doing just that are helping students.
That's how I learn, I like maps, I like organizing my thinking. Yeah,
but your students are benefiting from that love of it. So
yeah.
Fantastic. All right, Andrea, what was that one moment when you knew it was making a difference?
Well, I think back to kind of, I've always, concept-based just seems to make sense. I love the idea of inquiry and all of this, but when I first started really in the PYP and all of that, I was a teacher that went the deductive method, right? And I have these things that I need to teach. So I'm going to do a lot of direct instruction, and I had to balance it somehow with this idea of but I really love inquiry. And it would be this whole black and white of direct instruction versus open discovery inquiry. And so, always playing this, I got to do some of both, and not seeing that middle ground that it can live in. So I would do the classic thing. Let's put up the central idea and the lines of inquiry. And our first few days, we're going to unpack them, right? We're going to unpack the central idea, classic thing, right? And then we would spend 6 weeks on this unit. And we'd get to the end, and I'd still have 5 kids that are what's that word mean? You're we spent all these time looking up words and, defining them, and you still don't know. And so then you flip to a concept-based inquiry classroom where you're actually giving the time to have students develop the understanding, that you're having, that concept formation time in your classroom, not just look up a definition, but really that time. And then suddenly you have kids that are making those connections. You give them the time and space, and they're saying those brilliant, central ideas that you've never put up on the wall and they've never seen. And you're suddenly like, look at how smart you are. So it was that time, as soon as those big ideas and central ideas came off the wall, the students had the power and they started saying it, and they saw themselves as the directors of their learning. So that was very powerful once that started happening.
I think Ruba and I are smiling and nodding because we too shared central ideas with students.
Right. That's just what you did. You just like put them up, unpack them. Like, here, this is what you have to learn. Now let's just learn it in the first 2 days. Like, it didn't, you look back and you're like, it doesn't even make sense why we would do that. So yeah, pretty powerful once you let the students learn.
6 weeks also to just unpack one central idea.
Yeah.
Just focus on one central idea. You're telling them what to conclude even before they start investigating. So
right.
Yeah.
And that was that other piece too, of seeing the inquiry wasn't, it doesn't have to be this one thing where it's just total open and discovery, that there's a lot of guiding that you can do and that you can support with. All those different ways of doing it was really helpful in the class as well.
Yeah, amazing.
That what you're talking about there makes me think about what we do sometimes too often, I think, in secondary school, where we have what we call a research project, and you basically say, go and do stuff and learn some things, and without any guidance whatsoever. And I think for secondary teachers in particular, that's really frustrating because the students really struggle with that. But that's part of it, because we're not giving them the structure that they need to really ask good questions, to have a real productive inquiry. Just like leave it so open-ended that they end up going nowhere.
Or they leave it at like a really basic level, right? Of just like who, what, where, when, and there you go. Now I've told you what you need to know.
Right.
Yeah.
It becomes just a repeating of facts instead of noticing the pattern, which is what we wanted them to do. And they don't do it, but we didn't tell them how to do it, show them how to do it, lead them through it. It becomes, I don't know what the right word is, but it's like, I thought it was going to be this, and it ended up being that.
Yeah.
So it's,
which is just frustrating for teachers and students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that same disappointment of like, I don't understand. How do you not know what this word means? We've spent 6 weeks, defining it. It's like, oh, because you didn't actually have the chance to understand it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Kevin, I think I've heard the story that you might share before, but it is such a great one. And most people haven't heard it. So please share with us the story of your aha moment.
Well, there's a lot of aha moments. As I was thinking about this, as we're getting ready for this session, I was thinking it's never just one moment, right? There's multiple ones. But I remember a few years ago, I had a honors class, and I had a few boys working together on a project, and I was doing some concept-based inquiry, and that's what we were working on. But I don't think I did a very great job of helping them to see how the process was going to end. They were really motivated by getting a good grade. That's what they wanted, and they were kind of like, I could tell they were not engaged at that point. Went over and talked to them, and they're like, basically wondering, why does this matter? Why should I, what do I need to do to get the grade? I'm like, well, let's not worry about the grade then. Okay, tell you what, you guys you all got the highest mark. You're already done. I already know you'll do the work. So instead, let's talk about what is it that we're trying to understand? How are we going to use these things we're learning about in history to understand how people work and how people interact and what's going on between groups of people and their societies and laws and all these things that we were studying. And at that point, their eyes, isn't it funny as a teacher, you can see it in the eyes. Luckily the masks didn't cover the eyes, right? We could see that that something changed for them. And then I started hearing things different from their speech. their attitudes, their body position, everything changed, and they were starting to look for patterns and look for understandings based on the big question we were trying to answer. And they'd call me over and say, well, we looked at these 3 things, and here's what we're thinking. Like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way before. And then maybe I'll give them, here's another case study. Here's another example to look at. How does that fit into what you guys are saying? And for them, it really became, it transformed the way they approach class. And they'll still come talk to me now that they've moved on in years, and talk to me about the things that they learned. And, you know, they want to have that continued kind of learning. But on the other end of the spectrum, right, I've talked about these advanced classes, but I also had students, and this one touched me, girl who has in the United States, we call it an IEP, an individual education plan, because of some special needs. And she was talking to some other students about my class. His class is really hard, but you can't help but learn, right? Like it's like, if you go in there, you're gonna learn. And it was because of the concept-based kind of things I was doing, making it accessible for high and low, making it motivating, because you knew that if you engaged in the activities, you were gonna understand things when you were done. You weren't gonna have, maybe not gonna have a list of 15 facts that you've memorized, and then after that, you throw away, but they'd understand how people are and how the world works, and understand the world they live in, which was really cool. So it's been fun on both ends.
That's why we do what we do, isn't it? Right. To get that response. So that's incredible.
I think that's interesting too, because one of the things that I often run into is, colleagues or people questioning, but that doesn't, the concept-based approach doesn't really work for English language learners, or it doesn't really work for learning support students. And I sit there and go, what are you talking about? This levels the playing field in a way. It's a much more powerful tool and a much more meaningful tool than to memorize some facts, or here's a random algorithm that you don't know why you're even going to use it. It's such a powerful tool. And I love being an illustrator. I also love wordless media and the power that we can have in just images that all of our students can get into. Yeah.
So this last, there's one point on that. I had heard the same thing from some teachers, and I got to work with a teacher this last year where we really revamped what we were doing, and said we made a commitment to each other that we were going to do concept-based with fidelity as best as we could. We were going to do it. And a lot of English language learners are multilingual learners, and we found in the end that the learning was much better than had been predicted. And we were using a tool that my colleague was calling a learning target test, where we are asking the questions that we've been posing throughout, but all right, this is our target. This is what we're trying to understand, and letting them explain what they learned, and finding that the depth of understanding was much greater than we would have guessed based on just classroom interaction. When students were given the chance to express their understanding, the depth of understanding was much greater for all students across the board. Language learning challenges or advanced, we got much better results when we allowed them to express that. So thank you for bringing that up, Andrea.
Amazing. Yeah. I love to see the data that backs up everything that we know is right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredibly powerful. Thank you for sharing those stories. And I've heard you before, Kevin, talk about how, and you were sort of alluded to it at the beginning, how concept-based gave you a framework to do what you were doing before. You talked about, I was navigating this on my own for a long time.
Right.
And it gave you a framework to be intentional, but also to know that what you were planning would be successful, rather than trying something and it sometimes hit the mark and it sometimes didn't. So can you speak a little bit more about that? Yeah,
I think when I think about that, in teacher talk, we talk about teachable moments, right? These magic times that happen. And we hope for those and say, I hope when we're exploring this topic, that we're going to come to this magical teachable moment. But what concept-based instruction has done is help me to plan for a teachable moment, that I can present case studies and questions, and then students are there and ready, and we're able to have those teachable moments in a predictable way. And like, I know what understanding I'm trying to get to. I want them to understand this. And it's helped me to be able to say, okay, if that's where I want to be. Here's how I can plan to bring us there. Which has been that's the magic. And I feel bad for teachers that want that, but don't know how to get there. And concept-based curriculum has helped me to plan for it and say, no, this is the understanding, and I can help us get there. And it's so fun to be on that journey with students.
It's funny because I call those the aha moments, because they're for the students when you're like sitting, you're like, oh man, this kid just got it today. And in concept-based it's like, no, we're all getting there, and they have the time to all get it and go, oh,
right.
Yeah.
And I guess just talking to all the secondary teachers, and Lynn talks about this, how in the primary grades, students have those, it seems like, much more frequently. They're in a concept-based world, but then as we shift into the secondary, we lose our focus on that. And kids start calling school boring. They call it, they're trying to skip it. They're trying, it becomes a barrier to them in a lot of ways. But concept-based curriculum helps bring that back. And they're like, I've had students tell me, well, I was going to skip school today, but I didn't want to miss your class, so I came.
Oh, like, okay. That's amazing.
So, and I can pay that back a lot to the things I've been learning.
I really appreciated, Kevin, earlier you said, I noticed that there were some students that weren't engaged, and it seemed like you took that as a responsibility on you, not as a blame on the students, like, they're just not engaged. Like, if you had students in your class that weren't engaged, you cared and you actively went, I'm going to do something about this. And you actively re-engaged them so much that years later, they still want to come and talk about how engaging your class was. Because I think sometimes it can be easy to be like, oh, it's not my fault, it's the students, this is what I've got. But, you're talking about working with all different students and creating that class where they can't skip class because they've got your class that day, and that it's so engaging. And that's so incredibly powerful and a testament to the amazing things that are happening in your classroom.
Thank you.
All right, I want to ask you to share now how concept-based learning has transformed your practice. We've touched on a little bit of this already, but if you can just kind of reflect and think about, I guess, the before and after, what are some of the big changes or the shifts that have happened? So for people who are starting to think about, is this something that I might want to do? What might that look like? What are the things that you're doing differently now?
Okay, so social studies is we're notorious for massive amounts of facts and topics. It just is overwhelming. I was looking at a list of key vocabulary from Marzano, and social studies has 4 times as many as any other discipline. Like, it's over the top. And as a teacher, you realize there is no way I can teach all of this. Like, we would just spend all of our time reciting and reviewing and never really having things get to any depth. And so for concept-based, the thing that transformed it for me was it allowed me to let go of trying to teach everything. If I can help students come to some key understandings, then when they encounter the facts they haven't seen yet, they already have the pattern to, okay, I understand that already. I can see that this fits the pattern that we studied about with this other civilization or this other historical event or series of events, or in geography, right? I haven't been able to study all the countries in the world, but I was able to study a few case studies and learn some patterns. And now when I see a landlocked country, I know there's probably going to be some similar things going on. I can look for that and see how it works, as opposed to just saying, well, I never studied it, so I give up. Yeah, so it's and that's part of the fun too. I taught a lesson on strategic choke points. We looked at 3 case studies, and then students would come back and tell me, I found another one, and they'd tell me about the one that was in the lunch line and how they had to hurt, but they would just keep bringing it up and talk about how they saw it again, and nothing that I was telling them to go out and do. But once they realized the pattern, it was natural for them to organize their world in that way. So for me, the transformation was it allowed me to let go of trying to push all the time to get so much facts into kids' heads and allow them to get really good at a few things so that they could be great at lots of things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing for me.
Yeah, that's a great quote. Get really good at a few things so they could be great at lots of things. I love that. Thanks. Ruba, what about you? How has your practice transformed?
The use of questions in my classroom. At first, I used to start by just putting objectives, what we're going to be looking at today, inquiring into. Those objectives changed into conceptual and factual questions, and debatable as well, which gives the student more agency. I used to read a lot about agency, honestly, but I wondered how best I can apply it in my classroom. How best can I help my students own their learning? So this was a big aha moment when I realized that just posing a question or starting my lesson with a question helps the students own their learning, engages them. So when you ask them a question, they know that they're on a mission. They need to investigate in order to find out the answer to this question. And they are the only ones who are going to give the answer. They're not validating my understanding or my ideas, but they're coming up with their own. Appreciating their different conceptual understandings and also scaffolding their thinking by asking how and why questions. At first, I used to, accept the influence, accept the effect, the impact. But now, as soon as I hear these words, I just ask how and why for me to ensure that my students are developing deep understandings.
Mm-hmm. I think I love what you're saying about trying to figure out student agency, because for me, student agency used to mostly mean choice. And so if I give students choice, they will have agency. And now I do value choice, but I actually probably value voice more than choice. So yes, we'll give them choice sometimes. That's definitely important. But what I really want to see in terms of student agency is their voice and them just articulating their understandings for themselves. And like Kevin was saying earlier, their whole body language changes when their eyes light up and they get that, I got it. So, it's incredibly powerful. Thank you, Ruba.
I love what you're saying about questions too, because I was like, yeah, you've always got to ask questions. You got to be, but I never knew the right way to ask questions, right? You're like, I know there's a right way. I don't have the key to unlock how to do that. So that was really, once you no, I get how these guiding questions really get there. I took Tiffany Brown's online course as well. And she really helped articulate some of that as well with the different projects.
I think one of the things that is amazing about that is when we treat our students with the level of trust and respect that's required for them to have a voice.
True.
I think that's one of the reasons they change, is because then they know they're being treated like a person. They're being respected, and their voice matters. And they're not trying to guess what you're thinking. They're trying to express themselves. And when they're freed from that, I have to guess what the teacher's thinking, and they're allowed to be free to think. It's liberating I think for people. It's just liberating for people to know that you're respected and that your voice and your thoughts really matter. And I think that what you have been talking about really leads to that. And I didn't have a word for it before. I like agency. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Rachel, you also had said something recently about that idea, we sometimes will ask kids, what do you have questions about this thing? And they don't always have great questions. And that you sort of kind of that example, I think, was it your father-in-law or someone was buying a caravan? Mm-hmm. Right. And they were but they talked to another relative that had all this information about caravans so that right. So that they could then actually ask the right questions. And that was that moment too of don't expect them to know what to ask sometimes, that actually that can be part of our journey, is helping them open up what questions they might want to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what other changes have you made in your teaching practice, Andrea, that have
I spoke a lot already about kind of that deductive, now it's inductive, and giving the power to the students and the agency to the students, looking at sort of planning out units. Since we are a PYP school, we have that unit of inquiry. And I've really been trying to work with how to have sort of the math, the language arts, and these different pieces that might also have units that are happening, how the understandings can overlap within them, that all of my math understandings for a unit, maybe one will actually live sort of with my unit of inquiry, or I'll have maybe two from the language arts that live with the unit, but the rest are sort of in that specific area. And I think that really helped when I started doing that, because that idea of how do we get all these understandings, and sometimes it feels like a lot, into everything, and it's that careful planning, which takes some time, but that does help get it all out there.
I love that, because sometimes with that, where you say only 2 of the math understandings really integrated, but sometimes we need to have taught the other 4 before we even get to that unit so that they're ready. And so I used to think that when we were working to integrate learning from different subject areas, that meant making sure they were lined up. So we would start all the units that we were going to happen together, but often integrated learning means making sure that they've done it just before, or making sure that this unit will follow that unit. So that curriculum mapping and that curriculum calendar becomes so important to think that through.
It also really helps it somehow lighten the load, right? Because when it used to be all of my units were starting and stopping at the same time, it was like, okay, how many planning meetings can happen at this time, right? For all these different pieces. And now it's, no, we got some time here. And the students as well have that breadth of, okay, now we're moving something in math, but we're still here in the unit of inquiry. So it's a nice way to work things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
One thing I want to highlight on before we move on is before I started the planning using the concept-based approach, I used to open the ATL skill document and look at the thinking skill. There's a sub-skill under stating students being able to spot patterns and make connections to come up with, to develop understandings. And I used to skip it. I used to put it, to shelf it, because I always wondered, how can I guide them? How can I help them? What spotting patterns? And so after the getting to dig deeper into this approach, this made sense. And I was able to answer this question. So now it's one of the skills that is being repeated over and over again in all the planners. And,
I think my kids really start to know the word case study. I'll use it in all the subjects. Like, let's look at another case study. And they're like, okay, now we know what case studies are. They're just what they collect patterns for. Yeah.
True.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so I want to switch now. We've talked about all the amazing positive things that concept-based has brought to classrooms, but let's be real. What are some of the challenges that come with moving to a concept-based approach, and how have you worked to overcome or address those challenges?
I'll give it a go. There's 3 big things that always pop to mind, and that is time. Yeah, we can't unfortunately spend more time, curriculum, and also collaboration. I feel like one of my big first pieces is a curriculum, and I'm so excited for some of the math work that I'm doing with you, Rachel, that we have a curriculum for math that is based in conceptual understandings, and then it has those skills and knowledge as well in it, because how much time I spend with a collaborative team trying to figure out what those conceptual understandings are going to be for something when our curriculum doesn't just already have it built into it. So that's a big thing to overcome. And so I'm really excited because the time needed to do it. And so I'm really excited about the math work that we're doing right now for Professional Development International, and on all these pieces where we're going to be able to give something to teachers to start with, rather than just create it. So that's pretty exciting. The other thing I think with time is finding the right team. So having those right people that also are ready to go on a journey with you is really important, and that are interested in going on that journey. So finding them helps it, and keeping record of what you're doing. Especially, usually next year you're going to run into it again. So having a really clear record and working smart about it. Your school might require a certain planner. So make that planner work for where you're going to record everything so you can use it again the next time. And also I love the book, your book, Rachel, Carla's book has so many strategies in it that I can pull that out with anyone I'm working with and sort of like, what can we use from here? Sort of like a menu board, that you don't have to sit there and be like, oh, what could we do? You just pull it out and start using it. So that is a real time saver. And the collaboration piece, how to overcome it, is getting your colleagues to go to different training with you. And that's been the biggest way, just to get people to spend time thinking about it with you. Maybe even having a book club.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't mention it at the beginning, but Andrea was actually the illustrator for Concept-Based Inquiry in Action. So all of the amazing, it was actually quite a fantastic process as an author to have another educator illustrating the book, because Andrea did all of these amazing illustrations right through the book. But to be able to give the book to somebody who truly understood education was phenomenal. I don't think we had to give you very much feedback at all on the illustrations. You just nailed it each time.
Well, that would be my recommendation for anybody who wants to get into this. Just illustrate a book,
Yeah, indeed.
You really get a deep dive into it. You get to have a lot of discussions. But I mean, that's what happened was, right? I would read what you've written, and then you go have conversations about what that could mean and how does that look in your classroom. And that's how you make that idea come to life in a picture. So it's that same thing that you want to be able to like capture with your colleagues, of like having those deep discussions and giving things a go in your classroom as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And actually, somebody else who I just did a session last week, a masterclass, and just seeing somebody's visual notes from that they posted on Twitter. And I was like, yeah, we were talking about organizing, but also getting students to illustrate. I know you've done a lot of that in your classroom as well, Andrea. Getting students to illustrate their learning can be an incredibly powerful way for them to organize their thinking. Yeah. Kevin, what about you? What are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome along the way?
I would echo some of the things that Andrea said. I think number one is collaboration, how key it is. When I came back from my first 2-day seminar and I was talking with our curriculum director, I said, this is not something you should try to do by yourself. For me, I get so lost in the details of my subject area that I have a really hard time knowing what I should focus on and what I should release, or I want to do too much or too little or whatever. And having a colleague who's there and familiar with concept-based has been really, really helpful. One of the things that actually I like the most is helping other people with their unit plans and talking through concept-based instruction. That's like the thing I love the most. And so this last year, when I got to collaborate with a couple of other teachers who were willing to take a closer look at one course and really examine how we could be more focused on concept-based, helped so much. Now we didn't agree on everything, and it didn't look perfect, but we were able to talk and discuss and learn a lot better. And yeah, the book. I have to reach all the way down to the floor. Okay. Really was the thing that we would go to and say, we're at this step, what kind of activity would work well with our students, and we would select from what we had and what the suggestions were in the book and say, oh, this would work and we can tweak it in this way and here's how it would come across. But I do really think that collaboration is a really important thing. The other thing that's challenging is, especially in social studies, is keeping focus on a few generalizations and not giving in to the temptation to try and teach everything all the time. And I did have a teaching professor who taught us, okay, history teachers, you guys need to turn the page. Like, you just need to move forward sometimes. And sometimes we don't want to do that because we're getting really into something and we'll have the unit try and last it the entire year. And that's not really effective. So putting limits and bounds on what we're doing is a challenge as well. I guess also just trying to help other people understand what it is we're doing and helping people to come along on that journey with us and know that we're not trying to say that what they're doing in their classrooms isn't great, but that there's another way to approach it. That can be a challenge sometimes. So yeah.
That's a very
Yeah.
difficult point. I can connect to what you already said. Convincing teachers that students can come up with more than one understanding per unit was a challenge. They used to say, we just have 6 weeks. How can the students develop 5 to 9 understandings? We barely have time to complete only one. You know, so this was a big challenge for me, to convince them that yes, students can come up, they are thinkers, they can develop more than one understanding per unit. How did I overcome it? I had to do many demo lessons.
Yes.
On these demo lessons, we showed how we can cover maybe 2 understandings in one investigation, and bit by bit it's working. One more challenge is shifting from the deductive to the inductive approach. So I said, okay, maybe not, instead of just convincing them, maybe the walls in the classroom can speak by themselves. I call them the screaming walls. So they started visiting the classroom to see how the students are inquiring, how they're organizing their thinking, and developing their understandings. And then they started becoming more curious about this approach and asking more questions. So we started collaborating more. This was one of the challenges I faced. And also the implementation in the classroom was another challenge. And the concept-based inquiry cycle clarified the implementation issue. I had all these strategies in mind. Okay, I was applying them in the classroom, but the flow was missing. How am I moving? Okay, after unfolding this concept, what should we do next? How to move on? So the pieces of the puzzles were scattered everywhere. So again, the Institute really helped in clarifying these misconceptions and looking at different lesson plans, collaborating with different educators and experts in the field. Also, the specialists there really helped a lot. And
Yeah,
the book as well, the magical book, the green book. Well, I don't have it here, but it was a great help. Yeah.
I love what you were saying there about modeling for teachers. I think that's incredibly powerful, to either to model in their classroom, or in the Institute, we do model lessons with teachers where you become the students. And that is so powerful because it gives teachers the experience of those aha moments for themselves.
Definitely.
And when you can experience something, you're better empowered to replicate that in your own classroom. And I also love your comment on the screaming walls, because I've seen that too. Like, teachers walk into each other's classroom all the time, whether it's to, borrow the stapler or just have a chat or whatever. And they notice what's on walls, and they'll notice and go, oh, what's going on here? And I think I've definitely seen that in schools where you do something in one classroom and then someone else will come up to you and go, can you tell me what was going on in that classroom? I want to be able to try that. So yeah, that's great. All right. So I want to switch now to some final recommendations. So we've got people who are listening from all over the world to this session. What recommendations would you give to someone who's looking to implement a concept-based approach in their school or classroom and maybe isn't sure either where to start or where to go next? If they are like Ruba and Andrea and I were all nodding our heads at the beginning of the session about, yes, we used to share the central idea at the beginning, and now we shake our heads going, I can't believe I thought that was a good idea. But we need to acknowledge that we were all on that learning journey too. So for people who are listening, who are still kind of unpacking the central idea, or who maybe haven't written generalizations or conceptual understandings before, what recommendations do you have to them in terms of, getting started and having a go?
Go. Yeah.
Go, Ruba.
I just want to tell them that don't wait to get to, or to find answers to all your questions before you decide to start. So take those mini steps, have a plan, and decide where you want to start first. It's a long journey and it's not an easy one. The planners are a journey on its own. Strategies are a journey on its own. Implementation in the classroom is a journey on its own. So just have your plan, your long-term plan, and set your mini goals and see, what am I going to explore in these coming few months? Am I going to look at strategies? Am I going to look at the cycle? Am I going to look at how can I implement it? What workshops should I take to help me better understand this approach? And enroll in professional learning workshops, because they're really helpful. They're really helpful in helping you connect with other educators, maybe asking questions and getting feedback on your work. So this is what I would advise them to do. This is what I did, and it worked really well for me.
I think in a similar line, it's just start trying, right?
Definitely.
I mean, how many small workshops I went to and started, and I did these pieces. So I went from putting the central idea up on the wall to, nope, I'm going to take that down. I'm going to put up, 5 big concepts from the unit, and not the key concepts from the PYP, but like concepts that are really meaningful to the unit. And that's where I stayed for a few years of just like going with that and then building on it. And we've already mentioned it a few times, but it's sort of all those pieces that we started practicing and trying. It was then in the year-long institute that really everything came together and it just solidified. I wanted to do the institute for many years before, it just didn't work out. And then this chance to do it online, one of the good things of COVID, the ability to do this online and connect with people around the world for an entire year, having the chance to digest information, and then each week come and have question and answer sessions or sample sessions, and then discussions and connections with all these other educators was absolutely priceless. It is the best PD that I've had, and just really did transform how I teach, how I plan, and how I work with others.
On that, before we ask Kevin the same question, I want to touch on that a little bit more, because I think that idea of having weekend Zoom calls every weekend for a year can feel overwhelming. And I think it's probably a barrier for some people to go, yes, I really want to do this, but I can't commit to doing something every weekend. What was that experience like of showing up every weekend?
It just became something that you did. You had a little bit of work during the week to prepare. Sometimes you didn't. And you just had it in your schedule. You know months in advance when those calls are going to be. So it's not like a surprise. And you also had 2 options usually. Depending on your time zone, you might not be able to want to stay.
One might not be 3 a.m. might not be realistic, but sometimes both time zones work. Absolutely.
Yeah. I can understand that, because our time is precious, but I'm so happy that I was able to do this course where I really was able to connect everything, versus the institute that I think used to be 2 weeks.
8 days. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like I can't imagine that having the same impact that it does now. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
It's funny because we had originally said, we'll never go online because we wouldn't be able to replicate what we can do face to face. And now having been forced to do that, we had to really rethink the way that what it could look like online. Because originally when the pandemic hit, we were like, we'll just delay. But just as the pandemic hit, we were really lucky in that we just developed these online courses, and we thought really hard about what an online course would look like. We didn't want it to be the traditional readings, give random people feedback, and you're done, which is kind of the bad rap that online learning got for a long time, was that it just did not replicate a face-to-face in any way. But technology changed, and we were able to do these videos where people would interact in a self-paced way, maybe while you're cooking dinner, listening to the lessons, but then come together on Zoom. So through the online courses, we were actually starting to see a shift in what we could do even in 6 to 8 weeks, and then have that one-on-one coaching was so powerful that we couldn't replicate that even in a 2-day face-to-face workshop. And so we've now realized that we will never offer the Institute again as an 8-day workshop, because the power of doing something, we might go to a hybrid approach where we do some online and some face-to-face. I'm not saying we'll never do anything face-to-face, but we wouldn't go back to just 8 days, because the power of that year-long experience, and for us too, to be able to connect with you, to be able to have one-on-one sessions multiple times with every person who's doing this has been incredible. So
I think the only thing you might have to figure out how to do is like a G&T hour online.
Yeah, that was the one thing that, you know, when we did it face to face, we could all sit down and have a glass of wine at the end of the day. We didn't quite figure that out, but maybe we should. Maybe we'll make that part of the collaborative. Although G&T hour, if we were all doing it at the same time, could be breakfast time for some.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere, Rachel. Come on.
Indeed. Kevin, what recommendations would you make to someone who's looking to implement a concept-based approach?
Well, as Ruben and Andrea has said, I think that just giving it a shot is the, like, just try it. Try some things. If it's one lesson, just the change that happens and the experience you have is so great. And that'd be like number one. Just try it. Getting some professional development to learn what it is that we're doing, that of course would come before that. I guess the other thing I'd say is, don't sell yourself short. You're not exploring this because you want to do a bad job, right? Like, you've probably got a lot of things that are already fantastic, and with just looking at it from a different angle, you're going to see something like, oh, actually, I already have 4 case studies. I've just been approaching them from a different way. I already have materials, I already have things. I need to ask my questions in a different way, or I need to present this in a different way. And you'll find it, those lessons that you've treasured can be looked at in another way and become even more powerful. And that's one of the things that I've worked with Tiffany a lot. She's helped me to ask better questions and to look at the things that I've done and do in a different way and say, how could you use that as a case study? What could you do to make this into a more concept-based lesson, and helping me to find new and innovative ways to use the things I already think are great, but make them better. And so having some input from somebody else to help you see that is really helpful. But also to trust yourself to try something new and have it go great. And if it goes less than great, you're going to learn a lot anyway. The kids are going to just be excited by this newer experience. And anyway, trust yourself. You can do it.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining me for this conversation. I am in awe of all of the things that are happening in all of your classrooms. You're all such amazing educators. So thank you for showing up today and for continuing to show up and share what's happening in your classrooms. I think that your students are all very, very lucky to have you as their teachers. So I want to finish up by just saying to everybody who's listening, please share your comments or your questions in our Facebook group so that we can get them back to this group. I'm going to invite them again to be able to answer some of the questions that you have. So please do post any questions that you've got or any comments, or share what's happened in your classroom. You know, let us know. Think about the questions that I've asked this group today, and we would love to hear your answers to those questions in our Facebook group. So thank you. Thank you, Ruba. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
For having us.
Thank you.